Welcome to PayNet's Expense Tracking. Expense tracking is the process of employees accessing the employee self-service kiosk in order to create and electronically submit expense reports. Administrators are then able to review and approve submitted expense reports in order to reimburse employees. Approval configuration setup. In order to make sure employees are able to fully access the expense tracking tab on the kiosk, so it doesn't just appear as read-only to employees, it's a good idea to configure the approval level for this selection. To make sure this is set correctly, as an administrator, click on the ESS tab within PayNet Online. Within the next page that pops up, click on the Admin tab. Then, within the Approval Configuration subtab, select the Configuration option. Within the entity boxes that reflect below Approval Configuration, click on Expense Reports to either change or confirm its approval. Once it has been selected, click on the box below Admin. When completed, click on Save. Expense Tracking Setup. Configuring expense tracking consists of different steps, which include setting the payroll method and number of days receipts remain available to your company, setting filters for different groups of employees using expense tracking, and setting up expense codes for each group of employees using expense tracking. To set these things up, click on the Company tab, and then click on the hyperlinked Expense Tracking selection under the Other Items Setup box. The first subtab, Expense Tracking Setup, has two main areas to select: Method and Days to Maintain Receipts, along with other options pertaining to job codes. Within the Method drop-down box, this determines the expense information that is transferred to Payroll. If the duplicated method is selected, each expense code is duplicated when pulled into Payroll. This is for clients who wish to display a single earning or deduction code on employee checks, while tracking the other codes in payroll reports and the GL. Proper code setup should be verified to ensure employees are not double paid. In addition, some codes may be suppressed from displaying on employee pay statements. If the individual codes method is selected, this brings each code into Payroll individually. If the rolled method is selected, the individual expense codes may be rolled into a single code when imported into Payroll. Within the Days to Maintain Receipts box, enter a number of days that will determine the length of time receipts are held in your company. Once receipts are past the allotted time, they are purged from the system. If applicable, the option to display company codes or cost centers is available. When any box is chosen next to a listed code, show job code, etc., users may attribute an expense to a cost code. Once completed, click on Save. Expense groups. Sometimes companies have different groups of employees who have different kinds of expenses. If this is the case, within the second subtab of Expense Groups, groups of employees may be filtered so that the different expense options are shown for applicable groups of employees. Expense groups are used to determine eligibility for reimbursements, applicable expense codes, and payroll import settings for each group. Within the group code box, list a code for the group of employees. Within the name box, enter a name for this group. And within the description box, enter a short description of the group. In the drop-down box next to Filter, choose the option that gathers the appropriate group of employees. Please reach out to your service bureau if you need assistance setting up filters for employees. The start date and end date will most likely default to January 1st of the current year and 12/31/2100. If these need to be changed, enter the correct dates. Within the batch box, enter the payroll batch the expense information will be imported to. Within the pay type drop-down box, select the pay type the reimbursement will be paid on. If the expense information will be imported into existing checks, put a check mark next to Merge into Existing Checks. If the expense information will import for only active employees, put a check mark next to Active Employees Only. When completed, click on Save. Once a certain group is highlighted, the colored boxes in the middle of the screen help provide a brief description of how many employees are included in this filter, the green box, how many employees are not included in this filter, red box, and how many employees are in multiple filter groups that have been made, the orange box. Please note that groups are determined alphabetically, so if an employee falls into multiple groups, the settings from the first group, determined alphabetically, will be used. It might be beneficial to make a general group where its group code begins with Z, so employees who are in multiple groups will fall within a more specific group before they fall within the general group. Expense Group Setup. The third subtab, Expense Group Setup, is where the appropriate expense codes and details for each expense group are determined. To begin, choose the appropriate expense group in the drop-down box. Then click on Add. Within the code box, enter an expense code or name. Choose the appropriate payroll code in the next drop-down box. Payroll codes, or deductions, will have been previously set up within the Company Earnings and Deductions section. Then choose the entry type of either dollars or miles. If a receipt will be required in order to submit an expense report, put a check mark next to the Require Receipt box. If a balance or limit is to be set by an accrual amount, This can be chosen in the accrual drop-down box. If applicable, enter the maximum amount that can be entered for the reimbursement in the max amount box. If there is a limit, the amount may be limited to a single report or for a year. Enter this in the max amount type box. If the entry type you selected was miles, you can select the rate you want to use your mileage calculation in the mileage code drop-down box. If you selected the custom amount mileage code, then you'd enter the amount per mile in this box. Once completed, click on Save. Approving or declining expense reports. Once an employee submits their expense report on the ESS kiosk, the administrator set up for your company will need to approve or decline each employee's requests. The administrator will be notified by receiving an automatic email letting them know that they have a request that needs to be approved. Within ReadyPay Online, your administrator will select the ESS tab, which will then take them to their Admin ESS Kiosk page. In the upper right-hand corner of the screen, a number of how many approvals are needed will be shown next to the word Expense Reports. Click on Expense Reports, and you will be sent to the Expense Reports page. An administrator can also access this page by clicking on the Approval tab, and then clicking on the Expense Reports sub-tab. There will be a list of employees who need requests reviewed and either approved or declined. Clicking on the magnifying glass icon on the far left side of the screen will open a pop-up window, which has specific details about this employee's particular request. It is within this window where you can view any documents or receipts the employee has attached, if applicable. If any documents or receipts are attached, click on the magnifying glass icon of this expense report details pop-up window. Another smaller window will pop up where you will see this magnifying glass icon, and the document or receipt that the employee attached will open up. Be careful not to click on the delete icon, X, next to the magnifying glass icon, as this deletes the attachment without prompting you whether or not you want to delete the attachment. If the attachment is accidentally deleted, you will need to decline the expense report and ask the employee to reattach the document or receipt and then resubmit their expense report. Once everything has been reviewed for this expense report, click on the green Approve button, and it will be removed from your list of expense reports which need to be approved. If the expense report needs to be declined or rejected, click on the Decline button. A window will pop up where a reason you are declining this employee's expense report will need to be entered. Once a reason has been entered, click on OK. Importing expense reports into Payroll. In order to import expense reports directly from ESS so they can be included within Payroll, the following directions can be followed. To begin, click on the Payroll tab. Make sure that the correct check date is reflected in the upper right section of the screen and that you start Payroll. When on the Payroll page, there are a couple of ways one can get to the Import Expenses page. For those who process payroll, click on either the entry on the top of the screen or payroll entry in the middle of the screen. This will take you to a screen where you will click on Expense on the right-hand side of the screen, listed below Imports. On the next screen, a list of all the reports that can be imported will be listed. It includes the employee name, begin and end dates, the expense amount, whether it was submitted, whether it was approved, and whether it has already been imported. Amounts are imported based on the settings of expense groups. Selections may need to be made or adjusted to this screen, if not all of the expense reports are listed. If expense reports were for any time periods prior to this payroll, begin and end dates, adjust the from and through dates. If you need to include any pending expense reports, select the box next to Include Pending. If you need to see any expense reports which have already been imported, click the box next to Include Imported. If you need to select a certain batch the expense reports will be included with, select the drop-down box next to Batch. If you need to select a certain pay type the expense reports will be included with, select the drop-down box next to Pay Type. If the expense report payments will be included in existing checks, click the box next to Merge into Existing Checks. And if any expense reports need to be included which pertain to past payrolls, click the box next to Include Expenses from Other Pay Periods. Once completed, if you click on Import next to each expense, you will individually import each expense. Or if you click on the Import Expenses, you will import all expenses at once. Clicking on any expense report row will result in a window that will pop up, which will give additional information about the expense report. Once either Import or Import Expenses has been selected, a window will pop up asking you to confirm whether or not you want to import one or all expenses. If this is the case, select Import. After you've done so, the expenses will no longer reflect on the screen as they will have been imported and will be included in Payroll. Confirming imported expenses will be included in Payroll. Clicking on either the standard or individual entry icon, the batch entry icon, or the view list of employees in the batch icon will take you to the same screen where you will be able to search for the employee and verify their expense reports will be included in this payroll. On the next screen, search for the employee within the drop-down box next to Employee in the upper left section of the screen. Once you've selected the employee, you can either click on View Details below the Employee Name section or scroll down within the section below Pay Entry. Doing the former will bring up a window where all of the details of the check will be revealed to include any expenses that will be paid. Doing the latter will reflect within the pay entry screen any and all expenses that will be paid to include the amount. Thank you for using PayNet's Employee Self-Service Kiosk for your expense tracking needs.